have to say we need to learn from them. But I can't promise that we won't make mistakes in 2010.
But nobody's asking you to promise that you won't make mistakes. I think we ought to get on to a subject which you would expect me to raise, I know, and which is of immense concern, I think, to many people outside, and that is the salary structure, if indeed there is a structure, and the extraordinarily large salaries that are paid. And I think this goes with a feeling, and I think I'm probably right here, that somehow the people who are doing the creative work, who are making the programmes, don't receive this largesse. It seems to be a huge, great waste of middle management, a bureaucracy which is very difficult indeed to justify. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary when you think of it. About 30 over 39, 375, earn over 100,000, 37 plus, more than the Prime Minister. Well, the Prime Minister, no doubt, is probably underpaid, but an organisation that has 37 of its managers earning more than the Prime Minister surely ought to ask itself, is this really justified?
Well, though I think that if it, like other walks of life, I think most people would accept that if you want to have the best people working for the BBC, delivering the best programmes and the best services, and if you also accept that means that particularly at a moment in broadcasting history where people can move very freely from the BBC to other broadcasters and back, the BBC has to bear to some extent in mind the external market. Now, if you take, someone who's going to be the controller of BBC One, they're going to be spending about £1 billion a year on television programmes for that channel. You really want to make sure you've got the very best person doing that job. Now, the current controller of BBC One, we appointed. She was working outside the BBC, working for a commercial broadcaster, and we got her to come back. Now, she will, like most of the people on that list, if not all of the people, get less for the BBC than they were earning or could earn outside. They have to come and take a pay cut. But I think it's a false economy to say, well, you know what, we're not going to have anyone as a controller of BBC One who earns more than £100,000, because you won't get, in my view, you won't get the right candidates for the job.
But, Director General, nobody is saying you don't have anybody who's not earning more than 100,000. They're sort of asking why people have 400,000 for jobs, which one wonders what exactly these people are doing. And I think the old argument, you've got to pay these huge salaries because otherwise you don't keep them, where in fact are they going to go?
Well,
when you say that they get outside, where are they going that are going to pay? I mean, if they're 200,000, 400,000 a year, where are they going to go outside, which is going to pay them more than that? I don't see where these jobs are in the private sector.
I've just...
It seems so extraordinary.
The private broadcasters, as you know, are ITV, Channel 4...
But ITV is in a very desperate state, and so is Channel 4. And if they're paying more than you're paying, they must be in a desperate state, frankly.
There is no evidence yet, although, in common with the BBC, it may well be that there are individual adjustments, and there are quite a few commercial broadcasters, for example, not paying bonuses. But actually, the answer is we are still absolutely losing key staff to commercial broadcasters who are still paying top dollar.
I'm sorry to press this so much, but when I sort of look at marketing communications, we have a director of marketing communications and audiences who gets over 300. And then there's a director of communications, when I thought that's what the previous director was doing, and he gets 225. And then there's a director of brand and plan. Then there's a director of audiences. Well, we've already got a director of marketing communications and audiences. Then we've got a director of marketing communications and audiences. How different is he from the director of marketing communications and audiences above? There's vast sums of money, and one wonders really, what actually is going on here. I'm just not convinced that we need to pay this amount of money.
You need to think about the scale of what the BBC does in this country. I mean, to give you one example, we have something like 12 million personal interactions with members of the British public every year. We need to do audience research and to listen to the public about our programmes and services.
Yes.
We do need a complicated press operation. I mean, in a typical week...
Yes, I can see you would.
There are hundreds and hundreds of pages each day about the BBC in the press.
Well, so in other words, really what you're saying, Director General, that this criticism I'm making, that there is an overwhelming burden of bureaucracy, and that I feel that really the people who are producing the programmes, and the really creative people are not getting a fair deal, that is something that you actually reject. You are happy with what is now here.
Well, we've over the last 5 years, we've tried to reduce our if you like, our overhead cost and to reduce the burden of overheads. I know, Phyllis, that you've worked yourself in the public service for many years, and of course we know, and everyone listening to this will know that to some extent the public sector bureaucracies it's a many-headed hydra. There's you cut off one head and two more appear.
Another one.
So I mean, let's be honest about the fact that it's a real issue.
And
one of the things that we're looking at is whether we can simply make an auditable, fully accountable commitment to how much of the licence fee we actually spend on content. And the BBC, it's interesting, the ratio between top pay and average pay in the BBC is not high by even public sector standards, and it's much lower than in the private sector. The difference between average pay in the BBC and my pay is something like 17 times, which seems like a great deal. In the FTSE 100, it's well over 100 times.
I always feel that this comparison, which we always make with the private sector, is really unreal. I mean, the private sector is in a desperate situation. People are losing their jobs. People are unable to get jobs who come out of university well qualified. And we know some of the reasons for this. And any sort of public body is really so protected against all these pressures.
Well, quite,
and people really... I like to think here they are doing a job which they see as a public service, which it needed is. And I don't think you can always have it two ways. You can't sort of be bringing around your 400,000, your $500,000 a year and think you're performing a public service, if in fact that is overpayment for what you're really doing. And it should be really a privilege, I think, to work for this organisation.
Well, I think it really is a privilege. And everyone here, in the senior echelons anyway, should accept that they in some way they should accept there will be a very big discount. They will get paid much less than they could earn outside the BBC. And I have to say, if you talk to people who work in the BBC, it's a very disputatious place, and people in this organisation argue about everything all the time. I think one thing we don't argue about is our continued collective belief in
what you're doing,
in what this
and what public service broadcasting should be.
And I have to say, I believe that if John Reith and his colleagues, the people who founded the BBC, came in today's BBC, they will be surprised, and I hope heartened by the fact that people inside the BBC still have a passionate enthusiasm for what they do.
Thank you very much.
Well, she shouldn't be guest editing. She should be permanently presenting the programme.
PD James there talking to Mark Thompson, and she was, of course, she was a governor of the BBC back in 88 to 93.
Very interesting indeed.
We'll be speaking to her a little bit later in the programme.
She'll be in here live.